always question the operators where they got the projected numbers. Like, oh, well, where did you get the projected rents? Like, did you get it from Rentometer or did you get it from HUD? Like, what kind of debt are you using? Is it variable rate debt? And that's a whole nother rabbit hole I can go down, Brian. Or is it fixed rate debt? Like, are you using bridge debt, if the property's like super mismanaged to be able to like to purchase it and then, fix it up, stabilize it, and then eventually refinance into agency or traditional, Fannie Freddie bank debt. What does that look like?
Hey, what's up, all my real estate peeps? This is Brian Lucier with the Why Not Real Estate podcast, here with another interview episode with one of our investors. And today I have a special treat for you. The man I'm going to be talking with today, I've been a guest on his podcast, oh my goodness, a few times. He has reserved some pretty key spots for me. This man I've seen him grown from where he was an investor. He's unpacked the whole syndication, got that all figured out. Now he's actually driving millions of dollars towards syndication deals. And I can't wait to get him on here. It's going to be a lot of fun. Ladies and gentlemen, it is my pleasure to introduce to you the mastermind, the man with the plan behind the curtain, Mr. Kyle Curtin. Welcome to the show, Kyle.
Thank you so much, Brian. I love that intro, man. I'm very, very flattered. I'm probably blushing on the camera.
We can always edit that out if we need to. So, yeah,
I love it.
Happy to have you back on the show. We actually had a little glitch the first time we recorded it, and you are frozen on this frame a little bit, but you're starting to
There we go.
So we're good. So let's jump right in. So I already know some of your story, but for the folks and the listeners on the podcast, tell us a little bit about what you used to do before you got into real estate.
Absolutely, man. I've had kind of a unique story. I started to kind of discover the entrepreneurship, type of environment in like 2017, 2018-ish. Before then, and what I still do now is HVAC. I do that as my W-2 job, in addition to, the multiple endeavors that I have in the real estate arena. But essentially, I ended up going to that first like networking event, met an incredible woman named Lisa who like completely rewired my brain, opened me up to the thoughts of entrepreneurship, of, starting your own business, financial freedom, fractional reserve, like all that crazy investing stuff that we all know and love. A few years after that, I ended up buying my first piece of property in Leominster, Mass. It was a 3-family. I house hacked that. I still have that. I'm managing it from my current residence now. I ended up moving back in with my parents, managing that from a distance with, a really good boots on the ground team, as well as really good systems in place. One of those units is a medium-term rental that's been squirrely. But essentially, yeah, that's kind of where I've been at with that. I also host a podcast of my own called Creating Wealth that I've been doing for the past 3 years. Previously, inviting on a ton of real estate investors from a lot of different niches within the industry, but more geographically centered towards multiple counties in Massachusetts, as well as Southern New Hampshire. But I recently made a shift, to Brian's point, of jumping into the syndication world, and the podcast as well, kind of followed that trail. So I've been inviting on, a lot of syndicators from across the country, other folks doing, like CapEx management at like an institutional level, and just a lot of people within that world, and just trying to really, share type of knowledge from that type of space, because many folks don't really know too much about that type of world. And it's incredibly fascinating. But yeah, that's kind of a super short snippet of the
Well,
journey so
actually,
far.
that was a quite long snippet to what you did before real estate. You brought me all the way up to speed, so I guess we're done. No, actually, you mentioned your friend who turned you on to investing on that. So I know that you have a little bit of a story there. So your influences, you didn't really have influences growing up to be entrepreneurial. So could you unpack and stay on this woman or what you learned there and how that kind of turned on the lights for you?
Yeah, yeah, absolutely, man. Yeah, so I mean, kind of growing up, like I grew up, pretty average, like lower middle class type of family in a town called Tewksbury, Massachusetts. Um, and like many others out there, I pretty much grew up, with my parents, just working their day jobs and that type of thing, kind of quote unquote like the norm, I guess, if you will. And as yes.
Kyle, I want you to talk about the woman that introduced you to investing.
Sure. Yeah, absolutely.
What did that look like?
Yep. Yeah. So essentially, as I started to kind of get into and discover this type of world, I realized pretty early on that, I had to network. This was a very people-centric business. So I ended up going on meetup.com, which is a pretty popular site for, other virtual events, live events in a lot of different industries. And essentially, I found this one event in Charlestown, Massachusetts, which is about 20 minutes from, the house I grew up in. And essentially, um, it was funny, man, because there was I had a lot of anxiety, kind of jumping into this. And I had those, um pretty early self-limiting beliefs of like, oh, I'm, just like a 17, 18-year-old kid, thinking that like houses are really cool. Multifamily is this pretty cool vehicle to do some crazy stuff with, change your life. I'm like, oh, nobody's gonna want to talk to me. Like all these crazy investors out there, like they're just kind of doing their thing and crushing it, and I'll just kind of be doing my own thing, I guess. So it took me weeks and weeks, probably a good couple months, of having the desire to go to that event in Charlestown and like just being uncomfortable and coming up with all the baloney excuses of, oh, it's my cat's half birthday today. I don't have a cat, Brian. I never did. You know what I mean? And eventually I ended up pushing myself to go to this event. And that was where I ended up meeting this woman, Lisa. And it was
Lisa.
for, yes, shout out
Tell
to
us
Lisa.
about Lisa and what was the experience there? What did she say or what triggered you or influenced you?
Yep, absolutely. And it was a pretty cool way to kind of get a jump start into a different world, right? So the event itself was for like the cash flow board game, which is Robert Kiyosaki wrote Rich Dad Poor Dad. He has this, physical board game that kind of simulates life in a sense. And it was a great way to kind of jump in, and she was hosting that event with, some smaller, just like a small group of people.
So
And
Lisa was the host, and how many other people were at this event?
yep, between like 8 and 10, like really, really small event, And essentially we, played the game, and like I learned a ton right off the bat, you know what I mean, of like how different decisions will impact, your financial stability and in good ways and not, and that type of thing. And eventually, me and Lisa ended up just hitting it off. And she was financially free already. She was extremely, like entrepreneurial, open-minded, like start multiple businesses, like make lots of crazy connections, like drive people together. And I just fell in love with it, you know what I mean? And just the concepts within that. And we ended up eventually starting to meet on Saturday mornings, with a couple other folks as well, to just like kind of like an extension, and just kind of like teach each other about like the fractional reserve and like, how it all works, and throw business ideas back and forth and that type of thing. And it was incredible, man, and I learned so much within, the next few months, um and that type of thing. And she's absolutely been the largest influence on me to date.
So your conversations with Lisa were wrapped around mutual funds, the stock market, other types of traditional investing. Is that correct?
Yep, absolutely. She
So what was the
sorry.
pivot point from stock market and investing and now real estate. What happened? What was that light switch event?
Yep. So real estate was one of the things that she really introduced to me, the more times that we met. And it essentially just kind of became the thing that I fell in love with because I was previously into like dividend stocks and building up that type of thing. And then she introduced real estate and she had, some buildings of her own and rentals and that type of thing. And I ended up just kind of like gravitating into that a lot more for a lot
Why?
of different reasons. Mhm.
Well, I want to really find out. Okay.
Yes.
So you had all this other box of chocolate that you could look at for investments, and then real estate ended up on the plate. And why real estate over these other investments? What was it about real estate that attracted you?
Yep. It was definitely crushing the self-limiting belief of just having like, oh, you can only get in at like 20% down, 25% down, and in Massachusetts, a lot of these, buildings are like 400,000 and above. I'm like, all right, so like if I need to come to the table with that type of thing, I'm like, where the heck am I going to get 100 grand, plus closing cost, Brian, And it ended up opening the door of like, these low down payment loans like FHA, like 5% down loans, that type of thing, that made the ability to access that a lot more feasible for somebody that was in my position. And in addition to like kind of the logistics of it, of, the being able to control the asset a lot more, control your returns, um, as well as having something like actually physical, that you can drive to, you know what I mean? That really, you know, just made me go buck wild and kind of fall in love.
So you fell in love with it. You can control the asset. It's a real estate. That's why they call it real estate. So what was it comparable about the mutual fund or stock returns compared to real estate? I mean, if you can compare apples to oranges or apples to apples here, why real estate?
Sure. I mean, it's traditionally, and guys, I'm not, a financial advisor or anything like that, but kind of a rule of thumb for like the stock market is you could expect, like a 6 to 8% return annually, right? Like S&P 500, like trailing past 20 years, whatever. With real estate, the um like that can fluctuate a lot more, but you can also have a lot more control over that, instead of just kind of hoping that, things go well within those companies and that type of thing. And like definitely not to knock the equities markets and that type of thing. I have stuff of my own today that I put money into, but just the factor of being able to control your returns a lot more and actually do underwriting calculations of what that type of thing looks like, depending on your purchase price, like the amount of repairs and maintenance that goes into something like that, forecasted rents, like what your debt like fixed rate is if you're doing fixed rate. Like you can almost like kind of calculate what or project rather what you could be looking at, um going into that asset, instead of just kind of like tossing money into it and hoping that things kind of go well and things kind of being out of your hands.
So I'm going to wrap that up there. So you can control the asset and going in with a business plan, you can add value, you can raise rents, reduce your expenses. You have control that you don't have when you purchase a mutual fund or a stock. And to that end, you can force the appreciation in a piece of real estate.
Yep.
Is that what I'm hearing you say?
100%, absolutely.
100%. Okay, perfect. I'm making a lot of notes as I go here because I want to make sure that I'm getting the bullet points across.
Sure.
So I know your story. I know the property that you the bought and all the challenges you had there. I really want to focus on what you're doing now because I think that is so interesting. Okay. Typically, I would ask what would be the best property that you had bought, but I really want to hear your business model. How has it changed? I know that being a real estate investor looking for properties, I mean, that's whole one mindset, but you've upped your game over the past couple months. Could you tell us what was that transition and what you're doing now?
Yes, 100%. It's definitely been an incredibly exciting, 6-ish months. So a very, very close friend and partner of mine named Brian Ortons, shout out to you, man. Um, we were trying to figure out ways to kind of work together, right? In different facets. And, like I tried different things like calling leads, that type of thing. And like, I don't know, things just didn't really seem to stick with me. So eventually the day came and like we were just talking, probably on the phone. And he's like, "Hey man," he's like, "you absolutely love building relationships. It's always been your thing. Like you freaking love it for a lot of different reasons." He's like, in the syndication world, he's like, that there's people out there that just do like investor relations and help raise capital for multifamily operators. I'm like, holy crap, man. I'm like, because to that point in time, I didn't know much about syndications outside of just the theory, right? Just the concept of what it was. And the more I read into it, Brian, I'm like, holy crap. I'm like, the factor of building relationships and the collaboration, like there is no part of this part of the industry that's done solo. Everything is done in teams. It's just a matter of how massive the team is. And it's like that's the thing that really made me fall in love initially. And I mean, now I'm like probably 6 books deep. Like I listen to syndication podcasts every single morning, multiple, like just completely engrossed within that ecosystem. And to really stem off of the question that you asked, is it just has felt right in terms of alignment with my core values of collaboration, of helping people leverage real estate to get to their financial goals, of taking down like large assets, and value add and that type of thing. And it's just been like fantastic, man. Just it's just incredible, like this part of the industry that I always joke around with people, Brian, of like it feels like it's a corporate ladder that I'm actually ridiculously excited to climb up. Because there's like, all right, there's like 100-unit portfolios, there's like 300-unit portfolios in like Texas, like folks that you could be raising capital from could start off with friends and family, all the way up to like family offices that have millions and millions of dollars to put to work. And it's like it's just crazy, like the gap of like what's out there. Like it's like a lifelong pursuit, the way that I look at it, of collaboration in every step of the process. And I just fell in love, man.
I want to unpack this a little bit, okay? Because
Yep.
conceptually, you're explaining it, and I get it, I visualize it, and all of that. But for our viewers, I mean, you were in one mindset existing in real estate, and there was a transition to get to where you are now. So, from your concept to collaboration, walk me through a day in the life. I mean, I understand the concept, you've unpacked that. That makes a lot of sense. So, a day in the life for Kyle Curtin on the collaboration. What does it look like when how are you adding value to that investor? What are you saying? What are the drivers? How are you getting them engaged? What does that look like?
Yep, absolutely, man. And there's a few different prongs of that, right? There's definitely reaching out to a lot of folks that maybe haven't talked to in a while, current friends of mine that are active investors, to just kind of like rekindle relationships and that type of thing, telling folks the part of the industry that I'm into now, that all of my eggs are in that one basket. um there's, like I mentioned with the podcast, just switching to having syndicators on, to having conversations about like, oh, like what questions should I ask an operator before I wire $50,000 to them, and like, because these are major investments. I mean, like, within the real estate industry, like obviously, you're not spending 5 grand, to make most of these investments, but they're typically in relatively large dollar amounts, 50, 100, $250,000. So it's really just unpacking that, from some of these folks that have done multiple deals with successful exits throughout the country, and just really unpacking like and essentially educating. That's really the answer to your question, Brian, is doing everything that I can to educate the folks who, might be currently investing in syndications as, completely passively, to, maybe folks that aren't in the real estate sector, but, might have some capital that they're looking to put to work, but don't know anything about it. People that are actively investing in like 2 to 4 units and, maybe, they have some equity in their buildings and that type of thing, just want to learn more about it. Everything boils down to education. And there are partly rules, when it comes to the Securities and Exchange Commission of like, hey, like you really need to talk to these people and have that pre-existing relationship with them before you like they can even look at anything, So I mean, as well as like just morally, right? Like me personally, like I want you to know everything about what you could potentially getting yourself into before you even think about stroking a check, especially of that magnitude. You know what I mean? And it's education is everything, Brian, and talking to people in the one-on-one is absolutely a huge part of that for me. I have a Facebook group that I need to, put some more work into, but just, sharing a lot of the resources that I'm finding, especially from my travels, talking to other sponsors around the country, and just sharing all these ideas to my social media and just really pushing that out, to educating people to a pretty high degree of what this world actually looks like. Because most people just don't know. It's not necessarily a common part of the industry, I feel like. Um, and I also had the, kind of the thought of like, oh, well, syndications are completely passive. That's going to be more of an end game for the majority of people. And I couldn't have been more wrong, Brian. And I'm excited about that because there's a lot of different situations that real estate, investing with people who know what the heck they're doing is absolutely key, right? And, say you're like a high net worth individual, say you're, an attorney that's constantly working, 25/7, you do pretty well for yourself. You crush it. And like you want to put your capital to work in a place that makes sense and you know who the people are that are actually responsible for doing the work. And that's another rabbit hole I can go down if you want to, is kind of choosing some very basic questions of like what something like that looks like with folks, to actually know like who you're investing with. So long-winded to answer your question, it's all about education to me, sharing all the resources that I come across in my travels because I'm at it, 24/7, always consuming, talking, networking, and just really trying to educate as much of the population that will listen to me. you know.
So I wanna bubble this back to you. So your collaboration is based on your engagement to offer the education, and the education that you're offering is more knowledge about the syndication industry, how it works. Is
Yep.
that a good summation there?
Absolutely. Yep.
So let's role play a little bit here, okay? So you know me, you know what I do and all that, or let's put a wrapper around this.
Sure.
I'm in your database, okay? Forget that you know me, but I'm in your database and you're reaching out to me. You have an opportunity that you're going to offer, um, without breaking any SEC guidelines or anything like that. Walk me through your script. How do you engage me? What do you say? How do you make me comfortable?
Yep.
So I'm
Abs-
gonna pretend, yeah, hi, this is Brian. How can I help you?
Hey Brian, how you doing? I just kind of wanted to touch base with you. I might have something that, might potentially interest you that I wanted to run by you. And essentially to this point, Brian, I mean, if I haven't before, with that particular relationship, like I would be explaining, the very basics of like, kind of the pros and cons of syndications. And if something like that could be a match for your goals before we even move forward. Because that's absolutely everything. And I feel like especially, I mean, at the base level, right? Just valuing your time as well as mine. Of like, oh, if you have $50,000 and it's your last $50,000 that like, you're drawing from to put food on the table, that's an automatic no. You know, like you might love it like there's no tomorrow. I'm not putting your last 50 grand at risk for like 7 to 10 years. So I start off, conversations like that, preferably before opportunities come to the table, of actually seeing if this is a fit for both parties. Because as much as,
How do you find out if it's a fit? How do
yep,
you how do you get from point A to point B?
absolutely. So it all boils down to, asking like what your financial goals are, what you're looking to do. How do you feel about illiquidity? Because that's one thing with syndications that can be a con for some people, Brian, is they're pretty illiquid. And like I mentioned a minute ago, some of these deals can go for between like 5 to 10 years, man, of like just having that money tied up.
Yeah, explain illiquidity.
Yep. Yeah. So essentially, guys, the definition of liquidity is essentially like how quickly you're able to access your capital. So in, something like, investing in from like a brokerage firm, like into stocks, right? Like you can just, if you wanted to take your money out, like you press a couple buttons on the app, put in a sell order, the money comes back to you relatively quickly, right? But when it comes to syndications, if you need to get your money out, it gets a lot more complicated than that. Especially if you're like a few years in. The general partners, which are typically, the guys and gals that are like putting on the deal, executing the business plan, the ones that are responsible for the orchestration of this entire, um, you know, orchestra, if you will, they will have the right of first refusal on, if you wanted to like essentially cash out. And it's this part is just from theory. I haven't been through this myself personally yet, in either aspect, but essentially like they're the ones who get the like first ability to purchase those shares from you. Um because it's not as easy as just like, you know, shooting me a call, sending me a text message like, "Oh, hey dude, I need that 50K to, fix my roof." It's a lot more complicated than that. And you don't one thing that I will say that's something very big to keep in mind here, guys, when investing in syndications is like there's always risk in every investment, right? And also, if it's your last 50 grand, basically like if you're relying on this money to live, if there's kind of like a black swan, like a random event that's unpredictable, like your car dies or your roof goes, what have you, and you need something like that, like as an emergency fund, you don't want to invest it in syndications. I'll be the first person to tell you that, because you just like if you need access to this money, it's going to be very, very, very difficult to get it out. Um, so yeah. So essentially it's more illiquid in terms of like you put it into something and it's difficult to get it out, and you just need to like let it build, let it compound until, there's a refinance, a capital event, or they sell the building, whatever the business plan is, and that's when you'll get your capital back.
Got it.
It just might not be for you, you know?
Got it. So in this sense, it's not like a mutual fund or a stock where you can call the broker and transfer the funds, or a Roth IRA or whatever. It's not that you can move it from point A to point B. You're in this deal. And I guess the only other way you could really get out of this deal is to sell your shares to one of the other partners, or somebody else buys out your position in the deal.
Yep,
So I hear what you're saying, that um, you're committed when you do this type of a syndication deal. Your money is in the deal for the duration, so you really need to have a firm idea on what you're going to get,
yep,
or what you are getting, that you're going to have to wait that whole timeline.
exactly.
So, I've heard a lot of folks in your position say the main role for their limited partners is to write a check and to get a bigger check back at the cash out event, or whatever that event would be.
Yep,
And then they also put right behind that that their number one objective is to not lose their LP's money.
absolutely.
So what are some of your key criteria for underwriting? Because I mean, here we are back in our role play. You're approaching me. you have the opportunity. I see the opportunity. I'm going to pull the trigger and write a check. What assurances do you look for, or what's your checklist in your due diligence that would make me comfortable
Yeah,
to move forward in a situation like that?
absolutely. So I would say, I mean, and I learned this especially from shout out to Sandy S. Ashadri, absolutely amazing. She's a syndicator out of Dallas Fort Worth, and she's got like over 3,000 doors. And I had her on my show recently, and she was telling me, she's like, one thing that you always want to ask the operators, because most of the time, guys, there'll be, like a webinar that you're gonna watch that the general partners are gonna send you, or it's gonna be live, or both or whatever. But essentially, like, they're gonna run through the deal logistics with you, have the projections in front of you, like you'll have the pitch deck, I guess, for what this business plan looks like, what the projected rents are, like when they're planning on doing the refinances, like all the logistics, right? One thing that she mentioned to me that I absolutely want to bring to your audience, Brian, is to always question the operators where they got the projected numbers. Like, oh, well, where did you get the projected rents? Like, did you get it from Rentometer or did you get it from HUD? Like, what kind of debt are you using? Is it variable rate debt? And that's a whole nother rabbit hole I can go down, Brian. Or is it fixed rate debt? Like, are you using bridge debt, if the property's like super mismanaged, to be able to like to purchase it and then, fix it up, stabilize it, and then eventually refinance into agency or traditional, Fannie Freddie bank debt. um you know what does that look like? Because with these variable rates, I'll stem on it super super quick. There's a lot of general partners across the country right now. Well, I shouldn't say a lot, I should say there's a fair amount of general partners across the country right now that got into some of these large portfolio deals with either bridge debt or variable rate debt in the past like 3 to 5 years. And at the extremely attractive interest rates, like 2-3%, the rates now, guys, if you're not too familiar, are basically double, if not more than that. So do you think that that's something that falls into their underwriting on 5 years ago, to stress test the deal to see like, oh, what does that actually look like if our debt goes up like tremendously? And there's, in other words, like, that's one of the things that we pay attention to, is we don't mess around with variable rate debt, because it's one extra thing, and there's pros and cons to this, right? Some people will love it and totally get where we're coming from. Some people will be like, dude, you're crazy, you're never going to find a deal. And the reason why we like fixed debt so much is because you know what you're getting into. Given it's going to be a bit more expensive than variable rate debt, but now you're not essentially gambling your passive investors' money of, oh, hey man, what happens if the rates double or triple? Because it's nobody's got a crystal ball, and that's one of those things that you can control. And essentially, like I mentioned, like, the other thing is value add. Value add's huge. There's a lot of different like sectors of even like multifamily in general, and A class to D class. Like A class kind of being like, top notch, like premium, turnkey, that type of thing, to D class requiring a crap ton of fixing up, if you will, to get it to what it needs to be. But there's even, conversations to be had about, hey, there's a lot of A class assets out there that are like, what happens if you take on an A class asset? Yeah, the numbers look okay, probably more on the conservative side. But again, what happens if you take on an A class asset with variable rate debt? Now all of a sudden, like, if you're essentially just banking on appreciation and some extremely light rent raising and that type of thing, what happens when your rates double? Like, there's no hedge. So we're extremely bullish on value add, because even in the event that that happens, pairing that with fixed rate debt, you still have a hedge of essentially a spread to build value into, to um essentially, like, yeah, it's like you have something to bank on, if you will, in terms of like raising the rents a bunch, taking a building that's running like crap, to say it nicely, and making it a lot better. and then the appreciation is just kind of like the icing on the cake. So like fixed rate debt is something that we've always ever used. Incredibly bullish on that for a lot of different reasons, especially for safety. And you know, the fact in itself of like not gambling your investors' money in that sense. C class value add, we're ridiculously bullish on for a lot of different reasons. The guys have years and years and decades of experience in that sector, just like you do, Brian. And essentially, you know, building in that buffer to build in a lot of equity. You know what I mean? And in the event that, you know, insurance does go up and that type of thing, the ecosystem changes from what it did, you know, 3 years ago. You might take a little bit of a hit, but you still have such a massive hit in an equity build that it just makes a lot more sense to do it that way, you know? Um, and
So
yeah, like you, yep,
I don't mean to interrupt you, but I want to make sure I wrap this all around. And,
yes,
as we move forward, I want to make sure that I'm capturing the bullet points, the key things.
yep,
So when you're talking to your LPs and they're getting ready to write the check, some of the things that you're reassuring them with is that you're double checking the data. You can verify where the data came from. You're explaining to them your funding, why you're going to do variable versus fixed or fixed versus variable. You didn't mention recourse or non-recourse, but I'm imagining that you would probably want to go to non-recourse. And then the icing on the cake on that is the business plan and the value add. We're going to take this asset. These are the things that we see wrong with it, and these are the things that we can fix. And based
yes,
on our track record, because we've done this so many times, we're going to go in, we've done this, we know how to implement this, we know how to implement this. Based on the data that we got, we see where the rents are coming from, be it Zillow, be it Rentometer, be it HUD. Actually, a combination of those to comparison would be nice. Pulling comps from other properties, that would absolutely make sense. Are they uh, remodeled? Are they refinished? Are you comparing your unfinished value add to other unfinished value adds? Where are you there? And then after you implement this value add play, what is the current market gleaning from these rehab units that you could kind of compare? And are you hitting maybe 70 to 80% of that value to be conservative? So these are the things I think a limited partner is going to want to hear from a syndicator, someone who's presenting an opportunity as you present, to just reassure them that they're giving it to an operator. The operator's done their homework, and it's a solid plan. It's not throwing spaghetti on the wall and see if it sticks. This comes through a lot of research in the underwriting and understanding the market, and comps huge in all this. What are the properties in that neighborhood, A, B, C markets, whatever they might want to be. I think that is really valuable. So I want to push this forward here. Okay.
yep.
So we talked about that. We talked about that. I'm just looking at the questions here. Oh, this will be fun. Uh, I always ask guests, as you were starting out, was there a book that influenced you um, to open your mind to real estate investing? And if there was a book that you would recommend, what was the book that made the biggest impact for you?
Absolutely, man. I don't want to say Rich Dad Poor Dad, Brian, but like,
But you just did.
yeah, I know like everybody says that because I totally feel that, man. Like people tell me that all the time. But legit, guys, like I paid $8 for that book on Amazon, you know, like 5 years ago, 6 years ago at this point. That's changed my entire life. Like everything in my entire freaking life, like everything. Complete
Why?
rewire.
Why did it? What was it about that book that was the lights going on in the room?
Yep. Because it was this introduction to like time versus money, right? And like, oh hey, you know, like there's these cool things called investments, called assets that can make you money in the background while you're doing XYZ, you know, and then the dynamics of like, oh, you know, like, you know, most folks, you know, just kind of have like their retirement accounts and that type of thing. Hopefully it goes good. I forget if it mentioned it in that book or if I heard it somewhere else, but you know, the concept stays of like the average millionaire has what, like 7 streams of income? Like there's some crazy number like that, guys. And when you think about it like that, when the vast majority of the population has one stream of income, and that's from their W-2 job, what happens in the very, very, very unfortunate event that you get laid off, that you get let go? Now you have zero income. Everything's gone. This book introduced that concept to me. And like, oh, hey, man, like, there's a lot of different things that you can invest in. You don't have to be a bazillionaire. That's a professional term, I promise. Just kidding. To start building assets, and like, yeah, like, you might have your 401k with work, like they might match it, 3, 4, 5, 6%, whatever. That's fantastic. Don't get me wrong. Like, great. But the things with that, like life's too short, like you want to be able to enjoy yourself and not just be tied to one stream of income, and like, what if you don't like your job? There's a lot of people out there that don't, and like, yeah, it just, that book, Brian, it introduced the concept of like having different things going on in the background that don't need to be active, that like you don't need to work like 3 jobs, in the same week, banking 80 hours a week, like to make more money, you know that was the big thing with that book, man.
For me,
Crazy.
for that book, I think what really was the epiphany for me was the difference in how the average person thinks about assets and liabilities.
Mm-hmm.
Like, if everybody asks, I mean, what's the biggest asset you own? And everybody says, oh, my primary home. Well, it's an asset for the bank, because an asset puts money into your pocket and a liability takes money out of your pocket. So if you're paying a mortgage for your primary residence, it's the bank's asset. It's an asset.
Yep.
It's just not yours yet.
Exactly.
Liabilities take money out of your pocket, assets put money into your pocket. So if you're buying multifamily or investment property, these are assets that it's good debt because it puts money in your pocket by owning that asset.
Yep.
So here's where I always ask, is there a second book that had an impact on you?
Ooh, I'm looking at my shelf over there, man. I would say this one's going to be a little bit different, probably, but there's a lot of application to um, a lot of different things, even in life, outside of real estate. I'm going to say the one that caught my eye immediately was The One Thing
Oh,
by
yeah.
Jay Papasan. And I had a feeling, Brian, I read that book a couple years ago. I had a good feeling that, like, just, kind of judging a book by its cover, that book was going to be crazy influential. And it absolutely was, because without spoiling that book, guys, the concept of it is like, if you can focus your attention, whether it's in business, whether it's parts of your business, whether it's certain relationships that are around in your life, certain parts of your life, sports that you want to get into, hobbies that you want to get into, whatever, if you can just focus on the one thing that matters above all else, that by doing such will make everything either easier or unnecessary, things will happen. Because, and it actually, the picture just got painted for me very, very clearly, like in the past couple of days, because essentially, like, attention is the commodity. The more attention that you can spend on one thing and just, go a mile deep into one thing, instead of yeah, Brian knows, instead of going a mile wide, you spread yourself thin. And to use Brandon Turner of Bigger Pockets, his analogy, if you're on one island, right? Say you're in San Francisco, you're trying to make your way to Alcatraz, right? You want to build, like, essentially, if you just build one bridge over there and you just focus on that one bridge, just going in that one freaking direction, and you don't worry about anything else, you're going to get there, right? You're going to be able to use the resources from the bridge to build more bridges back and forth. And now you have like a crazy highway, and it's freaking awesome. But if you decide to build multiple different bridges in multiple different ways, you might only get a quarter of the way there with the resources that you have. And it's like, his way of portraying that concept has always been near and dear to my heart. And that's essentially what the book says, right? Is like, just try to figure out what actually means the most to you in terms of directions to go in your business, in terms of like types of assets to that you prefer to invest in over others. Like if you're investing, like, do you want to do flipping? Do you want to do short-term rental? Do you want to be active in syndication, passive in syndication? The more that you choose one of those paths and just go ridiculously deep in it, the further along you're going to be. The learning curve is going to drop substantially instead of trying to learn a bunch of things about a bunch of things at the same time. And your acceleration is going to freaking skyrocket because it just basically the more attention that you can put towards the smaller, very, very few things, the more powerful it is. And that book has been very near and dear to my heart, man.
Yes, the one thing Jay Papasan, and I think I have it right here, and see it. I've got my little Donald
Tabs.
Duck, my little Donald
Yes.
Ducks right in the middle of it. Yeah, the one thing, there it is. The one thing about this book that really struck me is knocking down the dominoes.
Yeah.
So if you knock down that first domino, it can knock down a bigger domino, a bigger domino, a bigger domino, and that momentum builds to eventually you can knock over a domino that would get you to the moon that
Yes.
first domino couldn't get you to, but because you do this one thing better than anybody else and you just keep doing it day after day after day after day, you just build up the momentum. Like Jim Collins' book, The Hedgehog and the Flywheel. I won't go down that whole thing, but I would read that book too.
I'll have to check
Yeah,
that out. Yeah.
yeah, really, really good stuff. So this has been super interesting. I've seen your transition from where you started to where you are now, and now you're this like mogul offering opportunities to limited partners, and you've got this whole package that you present, which is super awesome. Super happy for you that you got that you made it. Right, you had to get from where you are to where you're going, and who knows where you'll be after this. So, great segue there. So, what is next for Kyle Curtin, and why not get started? And before you go off, I know what I want you to answer.
Yes, absolutely.
I have seen your marketing like explode. I don't know what you did, but your posts are so much better. They look more professional. Um, they're more consistent. They're more creative. They're what's going on? What happened? I mean, from where you were to where you are now, what's all this about? And I know you've got some artificial intelligence in there too. So what's going on there, Kyle?
Absolutely, man. Yeah, I very, very much appreciate the kind words, by the way. It means a lot to me, Brian. It really does. But yeah, it's been with the marketing, it's been a roller coaster, man. So essentially, like building community is one of the things that's the most important to me above all else, right? And the real estate thing is just the vehicle to help people. I actually realized this recently, and this ties directly in, I promise. I realized something recently of the original purpose that I had for the past, 4 years, 5 years since I got into this has always been to, be able to make enough income from real estate. And there's, a dollar amount attached to that to be able to make it so me and my mom can both quit our day jobs for good, and like money's no issue. And there's a whole deeper story with that I won't get into, but essentially that's what my thinking was for years and years, right? Up until literally probably like a month ago. And I realized after taking some time to myself, going for a walk, it was like 70 degrees out, the sun was like setting and all that. The environment was perfect, right? And I was listening to a podcast. They were talking about purpose and your mission. And the more I dug into it, Brian, because I was like, oh, well, and I know you and I talked about something like this at a different point relatively recently. I was like, oh, well, what happens when you get to that goal? Like it's inevitable. Like, things eventually are going to happen and I'm going to get to that number and that goal is going to be achieved. Now what? And I started to really dig deeper within myself. And what I realized was that my true purpose is to help people avoid growing up the way that I did, where, money was heavily impactful for a lot of different reasons. There were very, very secure jobs that, changed with, my parents, 80-hour weeks, the whole 9 yards, tons and tons of stress everywhere. My true purpose, Brian, is to help people avoid growing up the way that I did and living the way that we do. And like I said, like we're not poor. We're absolutely not wealthy, but we're middle class, lower middle class. Help them avoid, growing up the way that I did, living the way that I do by using real estate as the vehicle to like basically make it so they don't have to live the way that I did. And what I realized was my original purpose from the past 5 years is going to be a byproduct of me leaning into continuing to create this community, giving a crap ton of value, giving a crap ton of investment opportunities. That thing is just going to happen. And eventually there's going to come a point where I'm going to give so much value to the marketplace that XYZ is going to happen. And my original purpose is just going to be a byproduct from a value exchange.
So Kyle,
So to,
Kyle,
yeah, to,
hold on.
yep,
I know that you're not the one creating all the content. So
absolutely.
unpack the content. I mean, for
Yeah.
my viewers out there, I mean, you're doing some incredible things. I
Oh,
want you to share how is it getting done? How are you doing it?
yeah.
What apps are you using? I mean, give us a blueprint. If Joe listener wanted, if they have their purpose and they want to, whatever it might be, if they want to have it health or wellness, whatever it
Yep.
might be, what tools are you using and how are you implementing them to do your marketing that you could just break down as a checklist for our listeners?
Absolutely. Yeah, so that ties right into this. So essentially, like building community, couple things that I do, I've been doing the podcast for the past 3 years. I stopped doing the editing about a year ago, probably a little bit more. And the reason why I was able to stop is because I discovered this concept of virtual assistants, which are absolutely phenomenal, very skilled people that can work alongside you in your business from other parts of the world. Me and Brian absolutely love the Philippines. And I've had, a couple folks working alongside me in the Philippines doing video editing because they're a lot more skilled than I am. I use a website called onlinejobs.ph. Think about it like indeed.com in America. Think about it like that, but it's a direct connect with the Philippines. And it's, like a job listing website. Folks in other parts of the Philippines looking for jobs that people in other parts of the country post on there. Make the connection, do an interview process, the whole 9 yards. Take it offline. Use Gmail to communicate, Slack to communicate. You can send funds over PayPal, over another app called Wise. Basically, that has been absolutely everything because similar to when I was mentioning when we were talking about the one thing, you want to be focusing on just the things that really matter, the most few things to go wicked deep in. But the thing is everything else still has to get done. So I have used virtual assistants for the past couple of years. I have a buddy named Christian that's in the Philippines that edits my podcast for me. I use a lot of templates with Microsoft Word and Google Drive, to essentially just fill in like episode titles, descriptions, to kind of take a lot of the workload off my plate, and implement systems like that. And then I have another woman named Kathleen that's absolutely amazing. Shout out to you guys that schedules social media posts for me. She also is very skilled in social media management. So, I bounce ideas off of her and that type of thing. She makes, posts, schedules them and that type of thing. So I can continue with my vision, with building the community and making my goals happen and all that, while other folks are helping me actually on a tactical level make that happen. So virtual assistants are absolutely awesome. And Brian, I know we had some very awesome conversations about this in the past. Trying to think of what else. Uh, Facebook, in my Facebook group, I have there's something called an admin assistant in there that's built within Facebook that you can like schedule certain posts for engagement and that type of thing on certain dates to say like, oh, what was your win from this week? Or what do you need help with? Like, what's your buy box? Like, introduce yourself, like that type of thing. So there's definitely some automation sprinkled in there. I'm trying to think of what else, man.
Well,
For
you
newsletter,
haven't said it yet, but I'm going to say it for you.
sure.
Chat GPT. Tell me about it.
Yes. I've dug a lot deeper into this very recently. So guys, ChatGPT, if you haven't heard of it, please check it out. It's like just Google it. I don't know the exact website off the top of my head, but essentially what it is it's an incredibly powerful AI, artificial intelligence that like basically has the ability for you to ask it certain questions about a lot of different things. You can ask it to do a lot of different things. It scours the internet and it learns, right? It's think about all like, the robot movies in the past where like, the robots learn and then they take over the world. Well, it's kind of a real fear now.
So
But
how do you use it? I mean,
yep,
give me a real world example how you use it.
absolutely. So one thing that I do is for the podcasts, I take, you record it with Zoom, whatever. You go back, you can get a transcript, which is essentially like just written words for the whole entire interview. Like, oh, Brian said, tell me about that. Kyle said, all right, it's this, all the way down. So you get a written version of, your audio video interview. Now that's something that you can put into ChatGPT and say, like, oh, take this interview, like this whole entire long form text, this whole story, and give me like Brian's top 5 most impactful quotes from this interview. And it will like do its crazy computer stuff. It'll dig through the whole entire thing. Literally like less than 10 seconds later, it pulls like, oh, in the one thing, like we talked about this, or questions for operators here. And it like, to be honest with you, like I need to dig into it a lot more. And I've had a lot more of an education recently. But the capability of this is crazy, especially for marketing. Cause then you can say, like, oh, write 5 blog posts about investing passively in multifamily real estate. It scours the internet, does its thing. Like all of a sudden you have 5 things, you have like a paragraph written for each, and it's like, I'm scared for English teachers, Brian. Oh, like write me a 5-paragraph essay about turtles. Like, oh, it's done in 5 minutes. Like procrastination's key, right? But
So
it's wild.
so that's on the content end of it. Are there other tools that you're using on the graphics or video, other types of, if you had to build a toolbox for one of my listeners, ChatGPT will get them content, but how do
Yep,
we make it pretty?
sure. So I leave that up to my virtual assistant, and she uses a website called canva.com. It's even if like, you don't know too much about like design and that type of thing, this is a free website. There is some premium stuff, but I've never paid for it. I've never used it. There's a lot you can do without paying for it. To be able to create pretty nice looking content, guys. Like there's a lot of templates out there. There's tons of like royalty free videos, stuff like that. Um, and essentially like just go on there with like your list of content from ChatGPT and just make it work. Like find, templates for quotes that you want to post, and there's like a crap ton of them. There's thousands, if not way more than that. Change the colors to be like your own branding. And then immediately after that, like you can schedule those posts on like Facebook Business Suite to post on like your Facebook page, your Instagram profile, to streamline everything. And if you use,
So this
yep,
all happens right within Canva. It's not like you're downloading it, putting it into your phone, and then doing something else. Does Canva do the whole 9 yards? You schedule it all right from there. You plug in your accounts. How does that work?
no, so that's just for like the content creation, like the physical, like make the pictures, make the videos, and then you do have to export it and then, schedule it or post it through Facebook or whatever platform you're looking to do.
So you go there, you get the goods, you got the goods, and then you give it to your team. They schedule it, they roll it all out, come up with this whole campaign for you.
Yep, absolutely. And that's just scratching the surface, Brian. Like there's so much more that ChatGPT can do. Like you can probably tell it to like, oh, create a 30-day content calendar about, the quotes that Brian had that were powerful in that interview above. And it'll come up with something. Like I haven't even scratched the surface, man. Like it's crazy. Check it out, guys.
Yeah, and I'm trying to think of what else I should have asked about it.
It's wild, you
Yeah,
know?
well, I will always say never stop learning. So if this is what's coming around the corner, get your notepads out and
Yep.
just start taking notes, start figuring this out. I mean, I've been seeing tons of feeds coming through on my phone, all these other things that you can add uh, chat gpt into your keyboard on your phone or this or that. And there's just so many ways to integrate all this. And, you know, I keep seeing all these other websites coming up that the people who are pushing these things say these should be illegal. You shouldn't have access to these because, you know, they give you such an unfair advantage over your competition. And wouldn't that be a wonderful thing to have?
Absolutely.
So I guess it's like anything. Those people who get on that first crest of the wave and ride it into the beach are the ones who are going to get, you know, the glory first, and then everybody else who's riding the wave after them is, you know, showing up late for dinner.
Yep.
Wow, really interesting stuff on that, and so much more to unpack. But I see we've been going at this for a little bit of a time here. So let me just recap and see where we are. So we walked through the whole syndication gig, how you're offering value, 6 to 8% return. I think that was on your
That was for like the stock
mutual
market.
funds and
Yep.
stock market, whereas real estate, you can control the rate of your return because you can do your value add, raise rents, reduce expenses, all those things that you can do with the property. As far as your syndication, you're building the relationships. We talked about from concept to collaboration and what that looks like now when you're actually having those discussions with your limited partners. Um, we talked about the pitch deck, where you got the questions that your general partners should be asking your operators. That's always valuable to, you know, they say trust but verify. I think that's
Yes.
Ronald Reagan. And definitely know where the data is coming from, and just make sure that your operator knows where that came from. Obviously, the books, the One Thing and Rich Dad Poor Dad, and a lot of that is mindset. You know, adjusting your mindset. And then you wrapped it up with some really golden Twinkies there, with the Chat GPT, the Canva, onlinejobsph.com, all these other things. And, you know, that I got to say, that is probably where I've seen the greatest amount of growth in your operations, because what your marketing looked like 6 months ago does not compare. Like, you were doing a good job. I mean, all your stuff was good. It was consistent. It looked clean. It was branded. But now you just like kicked it up to this other level. The
Aw.
videos, the music, the sound. I mean, I started seeing some of your stuff as, wait, is this Kyle's stuff? You know,
I'm flattered.
you've got these pictures of oceans and rolling in, and the concepts are there. It's like, wait, I know Kyle. He's not that creative. Something's, you know, not to, I mean,
Yeah. Nah.
but you solved the problem, right? And
Yep.
that's most of what we do from a day-to-day thing. We're looking at real estate, we're looking at business, we're looking at investors, and how do you solve the problem? How do you add value at the end of the day?
Yep.
And I got to say, your marketing lately is really, you know, it caught my eye.
Thank you
And
so much.
I mean, that's saying something, because I'm like stone cold on marketing, because I've done it for 40 years. So
Yeah.
to see something spike at that level, it definitely caught my eye. So I'm glad that you were able to unpack some of that. Wow, good stuff. So how can our listeners get in touch with you, and how would you want people to find you, Kyle?
Sure, guys. Yeah. I'd say Facebook is definitely the biggest one. I'm very, very active on there.
And what is it?
Just
What's
Kyle.
your
Yep. Just Kyle Curtin, Kyle space Curtin. Also feel free to shoot me an email. It's kyle@creatingwealth.com. So it's KCREating.com. It's a thing for a second.
okay. That's not the email that I use to get you on here. So you want me to use the one that you just said?
Yes, that's the one I use for all my syndication, you know, business kind of stuff now.
What's your website?
Yep, it's creatingwealth.com. It's spelled the same way there. KCREatingwealth.com.
And what question in this interview should I have asked that I didn't ask?
Ooh, that's a curveball, man. Wow. I would say I gotta take a second. Um, we talked about Lisa. That's usually a very key part of my entire story. Um, I would say like maybe my how relationships have changed my life, and I'll like building relationships, and I'll keep it ridiculously short. Guys, building relationships has literally changed my entire life in every facet, right? And what I'm going to leave you off with is the more advisors and folks that you network with, the more people that you give value to in many different facets, the degree of value that you're able to give, the more like the more things are gonna just like happen, and accelerate, the more you're gonna grow. I forget what the saying is, man, but like it's something along the lines of uh, if you help other people achieve their dreams, like you're gonna achieve yours. Like just give value to people, like everybody, like without any expectation of return. Just go and make the world a better place, and things are gonna come back to you. The universe is watching, certain people are watching, things are just going to happen. Just go out there, be a great guy, great woman, and just give value to people, and you never know what doors are going to open up.
I don't know who quoted the phrase, but I've heard it said that your network is your net worth.
Yep.
So that's yeah, building the relationships. Well, Kyle, I want to thank you again for being on the show. This was very entertaining, very educational, and a lot of good stuff that we'll definitely be able to share with our listeners. I want to thank you for all of that. So, ladies and gentlemen, I want to thank you again for being here with our show. This is Brian Lucier from the Why Not Real Estate Podcast, signing off, and we'll see you on the next one. Thanks again, Kyle.
Thank you so much, Brian.